So, how are you doing? You had a busy week at a conference.
Yeah, absolutely. The brain is running at 100 miles an hour, but in a beneficial way.
So, tell us about the conference. This sounds fascinating.
So, um, I work in the emergency management field, which is a broad field, very like healthcare is a broad field, emergency management is a broad field. And it's an emerging discipline that really has come out of the civil defense era, out of the Second World War. And so
Yeah.
it's becoming more and more prevalent in society. We're having more and more events related to the changing climate and more events related to the drought that we're having in North America, for example, is feeding some wildfires with some other causes. And so we have a number of get-togethers in the industry. But previous to this week, all of the get-togethers were regional. Other nations have a national program and a national conference. Canada didn't. So we have something called DemCon, which happens in Toronto every year, which is really an Ontario focused conference. I'm going out to the Disaster Forum conference in Banff again this year that happens in November, and that's a Western Canadian conference. And there's usually a biannual one on the East Coast. And so they're all regional, dealing with regional issues, regional importance, but we've never had a place for a national conversation. So nobody's dipped their foot in the water or jumped in with a cannonball to try to say, okay, I'm going to put up the capital required to run a national convention. And I think they were really, it was really interesting. And we can discuss later whether they were successful or not, but really interesting in how they framed the bringing together of emergency preparedness, which is topical nowadays across the country for numerous reasons, and climate adaptation.
Hmm.
Now, it was called the Canadian Emergency Preparedness and Climate Adaptation Conference. I'll just call it CEPSA, is what the acronym people are pronouncing it. They really wanted to focus on we need to adapt to a changing climate, but not focus the conference on a fight in climate change. So we didn't want to have a conference where everybody talked about reducing emissions. We didn't want to have a conference about green building retrofits. We wanted to have a conference about an area that people really weren't paying a lot of attention to. And the reason I said we wanted to, I was on the governing body. So there was about 40 of us offered the opportunity to fulfill this role way back and we started in February working with the organizational committee and the company running the show to try to frame who should be there. Because when you have a first ever national conversation on something,
Yes.
it's important at a conversation to determine who should be at the table.
Yep.
From an organizational perspective, the organization itself can determine who is the appropriate voice. But from an industry perspective, we reached out and figured Canada is, depending what your position is, Canada is a natural resource based economy.
Yes.
It's a 75% service economy. I get it, but it's traditionally grounded in natural resources. So we have an oil and gas industry. We have a timber industry. We have a mining industry. We have a fishing industry. We have a transportation and logistics industry. We have
Yes.
an IT industry.
Yep.
And so we were trying to bring those together, but also bring together areas of the country that don't normally speak to each other about these type of things in an open forum. So, people working on emergency management policy in Halifax talking to people from Regina.
Ah,
That's not normally something
no,
that happens.
no.
And so that was the idea behind it. They chose the most expensive location in Ottawa at the Shaw Center right downtown across
Oh,
from Parliament Hill.
yeah.
The idea simply was if it's going to be a national conversation,
Yeah.
it should be held in the seat of national power.
Yes.
That's just a logical that
Yeah.
Ottawa was by default the place where you had to
Yeah.
have it.
Yeah.
And so that was the frame of why the convention was started.
That's interesting. That's interesting. You remind me of something that occurred at the beginning of the COVID pandemic here in Canada. There was this I don't want to say panic, but it verged on that. There was a call for groups of people to join a national committee on responses to COVID. And I was invited to that, and to set out a national strategy on how to handle the impact of COVID on business. I would be there for business and industry, especially for supply chain and logistics and so on and so forth. And I thought this would have been interesting if it was something that occurred before we were in the middle of, or at the very beginning of, an emergency.
Yeah.
It's a little bit too late. You know, there are immediate needs that the pandemic required people to respond to. The distribution and use of vaccines, or whatever term you want to use, that the healthcare side of it took a priority. I mean, sorry, folks, but if the economic needs are going to be the primary here, you've missed the point. People are sick, some are dying. There's a personal side to this, there's a human side to this. Don't talk to me about industry or business or what have you. Mind you, they're also important because there's a relationship. There's no such thing as everybody living in isolation. It's a community of co-creation. You need people who are healthy enough to buy things, and you need systems that are capable of distributing and so on and so forth. Yes, okay, I see the whole circle. I am a systems thinker to begin with, but I thought, I said no because we had our own issues that we were dealing with, but that wasn't the reason why I said no. I thought it was a necessary move, but potentially in a post-COVID world, where we would retroactively look at what worked, what didn't work, and then how do we go forward. To me, that's strategic thinking. It did not occur before COVID, so it's a reactive mode, and reactive modes are important, but what am I going to contribute to a reactive mode? I'm not going to sit around talking about it. Things need to be done. I'm not part of the decision process. Get them done, period, full stop. There's no discussion around this. But it was interesting. It was an interesting request that actually didn't go anywhere, because I don't know if anybody actually took up the issue. Let's just leave it at that. It was not quite as bad as one of the former mayors of Toronto calling in the military to deal with snow shoveling. Okay, but
That reference actually came up.
Yeah, oh, I'm sure it did.
Oh, it did, as part of our frame.
Well, to me, when you're in reactive mode, which almost smacks of panic, you're not actually leading very well, because why would the rest of us who are just ordinary, the unwashed, do I like to refer to ourselves, or myself, and say, why would we have any sense of confidence that you know what you're doing? Trust requires that we have some confidence in what it is you're trying to do. And if you're panicking and you do this emergency move in order to save the city, my question is, what the hell were you doing before that? And why did it all break down anyway?
Yeah, exactly. When you have to go to your force of last resort immediately,
yes,
that's a failure of leadership.
Exactly.
And the conference was divided into 3 days. The first day was actually a private invite only series of events. And the one that I was invited to attend was one very specific, looking at what can we do to assist the provinces and territories to be better prepared so that they call on the military less in times of an emergency. Because as our Minister of National Defense has said, the military is in a death spiral. It has a recruiting crisis. It has a number of crises. Though recent reports say they seem to be turning the corner on that. But the point is that the level of demands on the Canadian Armed Forces, the CAF, it is really starting to influence their ability to train for their primary role. And if we put it in context that their primary role is full spectrum combat operations, that's likely to be needed in the next couple of years at various points around the world. And you
Yes.
can't be training for full spectrum combat operations against a near peer opponent and then go shovel snow.
No.
So we were sitting down saying, and this is getting important voices at the table and an important group of different voices from across industry. We didn't have an echo chamber, which is what I really enjoyed about it, is that a lot of us had difference of opinions on what we actually need to do. I put my researcher hat on and said, we probably should define the problem set pretty well first
Yes.
before we attempt to provide some solutions. As we say in research, a fantastic set of answers to the wrong question
Yes.
serves nobody.
Yes.
So we're just trying to figure out, okay, what are the conditions that lead to the military being called in? And then what are the variables that cause that condition to exist? And then can we influence those variables so that they don't cause? It's basically the scientific approach to problem solving. And
Yes.
there were other people there that had preconceived ideas, but we went through a pretty decent level of analysis with people from across the spectrum. And I think the end result realizes is we have a resource problem. And the resource problem is that everything is free to the governments right now. So when the Canadian Armed Forces deploys to the city of Toronto to shovel, the province of Ontario is charged nothing. The federal government bears the full cost. When Team Rubicon, the Salvation Army, St. John Ambulance is brought in under the new national program that they're created for the humanitarian workforce, that is mostly north of 90% of federal expense. So what they're doing is the provinces are looking at their fiscal reality and saying, well, my set of options I'm going to dictate those options by the cost. So I'm pressing the easy button of the military far earlier than when it's required. But what I get is a well-disciplined, self-sustaining free source of labor. Not doing military tasks, filling sandbags, diking, moving boats around. When military members go to fight forest fires in Canada, they're a class 3 firefighter, which means they're not even allowed to see flames. That's how far away they have to be. They're just digging up roots, that kind of thing. Zero danger, zero exposure risk, and zero training required. And so because of that, because of the way we set up the resource structure, obviously you and I, like everybody else, if we had an option that was free, we're going to go for that option. And so it was really a struggle of trying to figure out, how do we just start charging and saying, I'm going to make this so expensive that you don't use them? Because that answer is no, because they are useful in certain circumstances.
Yeah.
So it's really starting to say that, and Nova Scotia's come out to start this. They've started something called the Nova Scotia Guard, which is a provincially owned and operated volunteer group that receives some level of formal training to be able to respond locally within their own communities to aid their neighbors in times of disaster. So the provinces are starting to think about it, but the next 2 days of the conference were really, and this is an interesting model, and I don't know if you've ever seen this type of model. They divided it into a technical and a strategic conference. The technical conference was a nominal charge, less, maybe $100 for 2 days of access. That got you access to the show floor and a bunch of technical theaters. And I presented at one of these technical theaters. And I've never seen the setup where you have your large convention floor that we've all been to with all the booths that you walk around. But on the edges, there's open theaters. People are giving presentations at the same time, right next to people walking around booths. And there's a set of chairs set up. So people ebb and flow, or just happily walk by and go stop and look at the subject of your presentation, and they can stop by and watch. I've never seen that,
Yeah,
but it was really interesting because good topics,
yeah,
or good quality speakers who had the ability to engage their audience
yeah,
got large audiences,
yeah,
and
yeah.
people kind of aggregated towards it. And so that was the technical conference where we had 4 theaters simultaneously speaking about one wildfire, one flood, one on response, and different things such as that around the vendors. So it really brought a lot of people together. And so people that said, you know, I don't really want to go to the vendor floor. Well, you had to walk through the vendor floor to get to the
Oh, yeah.
theater. So we're, it's an intelligent model put together. The other half, though, was the strategic conference.
Mhm.
This is where the panels were happening. And they chose the panel format where 3, 4, maybe 5 experts in the field with a moderator would get up for 45 minutes and would discuss an issue. And it wasn't a question and answer period from the floor. There was no
Oh,
question and answer with the floor. The idea was we're going to bring together 3 or 4 of the leading voices in this certain question area, and we're going to put them on stage. And then we're going to have them debate a question that we've set up, not in a formal traditional style debate, but in a moderated panel back and forth as to how to address the issue at hand, whatever it may be.
mhm.
So that was that model, split it into 2. That the strategic conference was $1,500 a ticket. The technical conference was 100. And of course, you got with your 1,400, you got your feet, you got your food and
Yeah, yeah.
drinks and coffee break and all that other benefits that you would expect at a properly run and properly priced conference. So
Oh,
they had about 2,200,
wow.
which by numbers is the largest gathering for this subject matter in Canada.
Yeah, thinking of sorry to interrupt you, but thinking of the logistics, you indicated that the planning, even creating the framework around this started in February
Yeah.
2024. We're
Yes.
talking about something that occurred in September 2024 in a location that is fairly significant. I don't mean Ottawa, I mean the venue.
Yeah.
All right. Now, when I think of organizing conferences of any sort, I automatically think of the logistics behind that. Now, I know this is off topic slightly, but it is also part of the topic. You cannot schedule your wedding, for example, in the same year that you decide to, well, I mean, locating a venue for your wedding is probably going to take you a year to a year and a half. And while this is not a wedding, obviously, nonetheless, this was what, a 6 month, 8 month, not even 7 month between planting a seed and having 2,200 people show up. That is incredible. Anybody out there who wants to talk about logistics, that's incredible logistics just to be able to do that.
Yeah. And I agree with you that, and some of the outcomes I think kind of reflected that.
Okay. Not only that, but then to break it up into two focal points, well, foci, if I want to be Latinate. So to do the technical, set it up as such, and then to have booths in, so it's a trade show, plus speakers, plus, just the organization around that is a whole other factor. This group, whoever organized this, must have had one heck of a team to do that.
Yeah.
Then to have panels, of which there were several. That's what, day 2 and day 3. Well, the technical was all 3 days, but then to have panels with invited speakers. Okay. I mean, I'm thinking of people's schedules. I'm thinking of people's availability. I'm thinking of whatever, just thinking of, can your Aunt Martha show up at your destination wedding? in the Caribbean because she's 80 years old? Probably not. And while the analogy may be silly, it's very real, to say the least. Organizing in such a way that you could accommodate that many people, attract that many people, and then on top of it, I'm thinking of the marketing of all of this. That takes time. All right. I'm not even sure how they did that, but I'm not interested at this point. That's a technical issue that we can talk about some other time over a glass of single malt. But
Mhm.
at the same time, I'm a little bit dumbfounded by how all of this came together. And that's from a purely logistics point of view. Never mind the content or the topic. That's a whole other thing that we are really going to focus on. I just want to highlight that
Yep.
anybody listening who thinks that this is easy, let me disabuse you of
Yeah.
that. It
No,
ain't.
and it was the company DMG who ran it this is what they do for a living.
Yeah.
They run international conventions. They're a global company. They're on all continents. This is
Yeah.
what they do. So their staff and the organizer was saying to me, the entire conference staff has been on the road for 3 weeks.
Yes. I wouldn't doubt it.
Several different companies,
Yep.
several different projects, and getting everything up and running. This
Yep.
is all they do and run
Yep.
and organize.
Yep.
So they have the recipe or the
Yeah.
secret sauce
Yeah. Yeah.
down to a science
Yep.
as to how to do these things. Now, yeah,
But
it is amazing. It is.
now, since we're in the general world of a preparedness, it's one thing to have the crew to be able to do all this. It's one thing to expect the crew to work the 24 hours, 7 days a week for 3 weeks. That is their job, and I'm sure I hope they get paid well for that. But then there are the externals. Now, in the world of vulnerability, to think that you could go to venue X and have it available. You need venue X because the anticipated crowd is significant enough. You can't do this in a regular hotel. It's just not going to happen. Even the ballroom in a very large hotel would not be able to accommodate this. That's 2,200 people is a lot of people. Even if they're not all gathered in the same place at the same time, it's still a lot of people. So a convention center of some sort is needed. Now, the possibility of a convention center in any city that I know of being available on a specific set of dates that are not 24 months later,
Yeah.
you just go, how?
I just say the International Social Capital Association, that what I belong to, and I'm on the board of directors. We're planning our first conference. It's February of 2026. And
Yes,
we're nervous we might not have enough time.
exactly.
The only thing that says I have enough time to do that is because the venue is secured because one of the board members is on an academic of an institution that has given the thumbs up.
There.
With the venue secured, we think 18 months is pushing it.
Yep,
And these folks pulled this sucker off in 7.
that's right.
And so I think had they done 18 months, the experience of this week would have looked somewhat different.
Okay, that raises a more interesting
Yeah.
question, and that is when you're running full tilt because your butt is on fire. I'm going to keep it out of the street language, but butt is bad enough. And and you actually have no alternative.
No,
Right?
you don't.
There are no options.
No.
You can't turn left. You can't turn right. It's either straight ahead or nothing at all. And if it's nothing at all, the loss of money is beyond even comprehension at this point.
Yep.
Never mind everybody tearing pieces off of you as a result.
Yep.
You're one almost wants to come to a sense, notice I'm trying to avoid the word conclusion, come to a sense that in an emergency, we tend to act better than if we had incredible amounts of time to deal with the problem.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's in military operational planning. It happens a lot too. I come up with better plans under tight time constraints
Yeah,
because I don't have time to think fuzzy.
no, right.
I refer to it as fuzziness. I don't have time to think fuzzy. I
Yeah,
have to focus on the task at hand with the resources I have,
yeah,
with the parameters
yeah,
imposed on me, and make it happen to the best possible way. And so when you're having a national conversation,
yeah.
it probably means you should have the national government present. And I'm going to be a bit unapologetically direct about our federal government's decision not to participate.
Oh, interesting.
We're trying to start a national conversation on climate, which happens to be, you would think, something that this current political side of the government believes is important. And the rest of us believe it is so. Preparedness and the recent Jasper fires last year's or 2 years ago, we had the atmospheric river in southern British Columbia. We've got a number of events that are occurring that are causing significant damage across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And Public Safety Canada sent 2 low-level staffers.
Mm.
What our opening address was from the head of the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Office for the Americas.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So the individual responsible for UNDRR and climate risk and assessment for all of North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean
Yeah,
came to here to give the opening address to frame the conversation we were going to have about
yeah,
the risk profile we were living in. And
yeah,
our federal government sent 2 low-level staffers.
yeah, yeah,
That's it.
yeah,
No
yeah,
matter how much lobbying was done,
yeah.
the public service was not interested in participating. Now, take it down. We had the associate deputy minister and senior representatives from across several provinces
Oh, interesting.
did show up.
Okay.
Now, you would expect Ontario, it's in Ontario, so Ontario's going to show up, right? No political staffers showed up. No politicians showed up except for, and I won't name them because it doesn't matter, opposition critics to emergency preparedness showed up in the conference and listened to various things that were going on. We had a number of keynote top level companies who work in this space within Canada were there. And so trying to start a national conversation when the apparent agency responsible for national coordination has zero interest in participating,
Mhm.
even after 7 months of notice. I have to say that part out loud, unapologetically, because that's exactly what occurred. And so we're now sitting here going, okay, how do you get, because a lot of, and we can go into detail of the great things that we talked about, but the conclusion of a lot of things is we need to improve our game and coordination and cooperation.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's kind of important. If you want to have a family meeting, you probably need the family to attend.
Really?
I don't know. I'm trying to be the nicest reference I possibly can here,
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
but
Oh,
it
yes.
it it just demonstrated, unfortunately, left a little bit of a bad taste in our mouths when you had the UN sending their very top representative for the entire region of the world to give the keynote address, followed up by the deputy mayor for the host city, followed up by the deputy minister responsible for the province. Boom, nothing else in between.
You know, I agree. I would be really thoroughly, beyond the shadow of a doubt, pissed off.
Yeah.
That's a nice way of putting it. I'm trying to keep away from street. as much as possible in my language, since this is being recorded. I agree. I agree 100%. There's a part of me that actually I wrote it down when you started talking, that, you know, self-reliance. I wrote this phrase down. This is mine, not yours. Self-reliance is the core of preparedness.
Yeah.
And it's almost, without being an apocalyptic approach that tells the rest of the world to get lost and I'm going to go up to my, you know, bunker, so on and so forth. It's not about a survivalist, but it's pretty damn close when you think that maybe survivalists are not as lunatic as some of us think they are. I know I could never be a survivalist because you go canoeing. I wouldn't even think about, you know, something that doesn't have hot and cold running water, never mind a flush toilet. So, and never mind living with people in close quarters. So I'm glad I have walls separating me from my neighbors. The issue is that while there's a level of disappointment, no two ways about it, that is true, and should be disappointing. It should be disappointing. It also raises that, you know, little flag that says, screw you. If you can't participate, and you're not the least bit interested, but the rest of us are, then maybe we'll go our own way. We might find ways to wheedle money out of you on a project basis, but you don't have a say here. You don't have a chair at the table.
Yeah.
We will create, and it'll be one that is we will rely on because you ain't there.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to deal with this on the side of whether it's this political party or that political party, or it's the opposition or I don't care about that. It's politicians are politicians. They have their own way of screwing up the universe. Who needs them hanging around anyway? Besides, that's just showmanship. But not to have representatives from the government who are responsible for the management of the systems that keep us safe, right? And just, I don't know, I cannot say they ignored it. They just weren't there. They were present more by their absence than they were by their presence.
Yeah.
And
the message was clear. Yeah.
Yeah, the message was clear. This is not important. I don't want to put guns to people's heads because I personally don't care who shows up. I'm more interested in because I'm not interested in grandstanding. That bothers me. I turn off on that kind of stuff. Here's the expert who's going to talk. Who cares? Go away. But to move our conversation along a bit, could you tell us a little bit more? Fine, those who were there, those who weren't there, the logistics of the organization, you know, organizing it, the two-tier approach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all very interesting, fascinating, eye-opening. What are some of the key topics? What are the things that were discussed?
So really the topics were in the strategic side of the conference because that's where the panels were. And a number of the important questions will kind of phrase that. The first thing I'll describe is the main panel that I was on, and it was, does Canada need a civilian disaster response force? Some organized, non-military, non-government capability to respond to disasters in the country. That was one example of the type of questions. So things that disasters don't respect geographical boundaries. So they don't, they're not jurisdictional.
I
right?
hadn't noticed.
The floods, the wildfires, you know,
Yeah.
we all joke in the industry that nobody cares about nobody cared last year about wildfires until people in Toronto and Montreal couldn't breathe.
Right.
Then all of a sudden it became a national emergency and everybody cared.
Right.
All joking aside, climate risk and disasters do not respect borders. So they're not jurisdictionally bounded, which means that their impacts and their secondary impacts, which a lot don't talk about, are cross country. So shutting down a piece of critical infrastructure or a major industry in Alberta due to a wildfire has secondary and tertiary effects across the Canadian economy. So there are impacts. So there were other panels talking about what is the private public relationship in the
Yes,
industry, because right now we have a very poor level of coordination at the
yes,
national level and to some degree at the provincial territorial level with our major business partners in the field of emergency management and emergency preparedness.
right.
So every corporate corporate entities have a capitalist based reason to be
Yeah,
prepared
yeah, yeah.
because income requires operation.
That's right.
Downtime costs money and doesn't
That's
generate income.
right.
And on top of that, they have a need to have a healthy community because a
That's
healthy
right.
community represents a base of customers who will
Yeah,
purchase their product or
yeah.
service.
That's right.
So by nature, as the risk expands and the corporate side of Canada has, I would argue, is ahead of the game of the
Yes.
public
Yes.
sector
I
in
agree.
formally organizing and providing the resources necessary
Yes.
to prepare their industries, at least to a certain degree. I mean, we could recommend different avenues, but at least they're actively taking the risk seriously
Yeah.
and mitigating it to the best extent possible.
Yeah.
That conversation does not move over to the public side.
Right.
What's happening in industry? So we don't have we called it the Emergency Management Council table to just come up with a name for it. We don't have those. So the city of Toronto does not have a space where the public Office of Emergency Management and the corporate entities resident in Toronto sit around a table to talk about common issues in emergency management and disaster readiness.
Mm.
That conversation needs to happen. That was one of the great outcomes that came out of this, is the collective understanding,
Mhm.
both from the public representatives and the private sector
Mhm.
representatives,
Mhm.
that we're not having that conversation at any level of our
Mhm.
governance,
Mhm.
and that there is great value in putting these parties together.
Yeah.
And of course, the funny part was the not-for-profit sector is in the background yelling out loud, we're here as well.
Yeah.
Don't forget us. So there's a number of not-for-profits, St. John Ambulance, Team Rubicon,
Yeah. Yeah.
Red
Yeah.
Cross.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
all present here. And so it's really, we call it the council table because it's like your council at your city council, which represents every ward. A council table has to represent every
Yeah.
constituent stakeholder.
That's right. That's right.
And a lot of those stakeholders to this day, and some of them even at the conference, they enter the conference not really understanding what role they may have
Uh, uh,
in this
uh,
kind of emergency management framework. So
okay.
if for example, if you're a Canadian Tire, it's not necessarily easy to consider what is their role in emergency preparedness and emergency management outside of the corporate walls. Like they
Right.
get it inside their corporate walls. Canadian
Yep.
Tire is a great, resilient company,
Yep.
but they are also resident in almost every Canadian community.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yep.
what role do
Yep.
they play in the
Yep.
greater preparedness in our
Yep.
greater community?
Yep.
That is not well understood at the
No,
corporate level. And it's because we're not having the conversations. Is
that's
this,
right.
like I said, again, I just returned to it. This is one of the great outcomes of it, is people having that aha moment.
Yeah.
That's only possible
Yeah.
when you put different parties in a room,
Yes.
even though they're not necessarily sure why they need to be or should be there,
Yeah.
but they
Yep.
come anyhow
Yep.
because it's an important issue to everybody. And they walk away going, you know what? I should be involved. And I'll give you one example. I ran into Beth. I'll just call her Beth and save her name on the podcast. Um, she is the head of public safety for the city of Ottawa. And she said to me, because I tell everybody I'm in Ottawa, I'm championing the city all the time. And she said, we should probably get together all of the people in the city of Ottawa that work in the field, let alone getting the corporate side involved, but figure out who in the city we operates in the industry. because she had a number of people coming up to her at the conference saying, one of our core sponsors was KPMG. KPMG has its national office here.
That's right. I know. I worked with them.
Right. And so KPMG comes down the stairs and out the door and says, we should probably chat about the city. And
Yeah.
so I've agreed to be one of her helpers in putting together this piece of whatever it turns out to be, of bringing all the voices together, because we don't understand what each other's risk profile is, what each other's interested in, and we don't understand how we can collectively help each other until we actually are in the room together. And that's the first of a couple of astonishing outcomes that people came to.
Interesting, because I'm writing notes down going, okay. Wow. Yeah, I once belonged to an organization called United Nations Global Compact. The United Nations Global Compact was established under the Secretariat of Kofi Annan. He actually created this, and the movement the Director General reported directly to him, not through all the other 10 million layers of bureaucracy at the UN.
Yeah, there's a bit of that.
UN is a beautiful 1950s building that is just filled with a lot of frightening stuff. And I don't mean the artwork. I mean, give me a break. It's a beautiful place to go to, but you just walk away shaking your head going, really? So the UNGC actually died out in Canada. It originally existed, then it died out, and I was part of a movement to get it reinstated. And this is a group that looks at corporate social responsibility, but in the sense of, here are the 12 fundamental principles that are universal around the world in terms of what constitutes corporate responsibility. All right, and this is the UNGC list. And companies and organizations, not just companies, but organizations that belong to it and become a member of it, say in Canada or anywhere else in the world, they actually have to demonstrate that they have applied the principles in how they organize their company.
Yep.
All right. And it's not just a membership. It's a membership built on action. You have to do something and you have to report. I think it's every 3 years or every 2 years you have to report. This is what we've done this year. Right. I got a little too busy, so I walked away from it. But the model was rather interesting. It wasn't just a think tank, let's get together and talk, but it was an action oriented group. Somewhat successful, somewhat not so successful, but I'm not going to talk about that. I find some of the words that I wrote down as you were talking, I was going, wow. The Emergency Management Council, all right, I wrote down think tank, but it's more than that. It's a coordinating group.
Yeah.
Without the problem around that is jurisdictions, but let's put jurisdictional issues aside. If it's more a case of what's out there and how do we coordinate the relationships among all the different players inside of the emergency world, everything from the not-for-profits all the way up to the corporations, then we say, and not only how do we coordinate, but how do we identify what some of those actions could be?
Yep.
Automatically, I think of Canadian Tire, probably one of Canada's most premier companies. I own a condo. I never go to Canadian Tire because I have no need to. decide I wouldn't know what to do with a screwdriver anyway, and my father would be laughing and rolling in his grave if I attempted to do anything anyway. So I'm one of those people who doesn't go to Canadian Tire. I don't even buy tires. I don't own a car. All right, moving right along. It is an incredible network. Now, there's the key.
Yep.
In private sector, we have, here in Canada in particular, because our geography is so large, we have networks of connectivity that we don't even recognize.
Yep.
And they have potential roles to play that are very different from, say, the local fire department.
Yes.
It becomes a network of national coordination using private sector as a means to that end.
Yes. And the coordination is the key. What we're not trying to create is a decision-making body.
No.
Because corporations will not put themselves under the thumb of the public sector.
No, and I don't, no.
And we frame this in, because emergency management, is in incident management is what they do. They don't do incident response. So fire, police, EMS, that's outside emergency management. They do incident management, which means they run the big sector, the coordinating agency. They're in charge of public sector assets. That's all the government is in charge to in a disaster. The government has no authority to order the citizens to do things, no authority to NGOs, and they can't order the business community to do anything. So we're not interested in creating a decision-making body. We want a conversation body.
Yes.
We want a coordination agency.
Yes.
Not even an agency, just a place where people can talk about how are you intending to respond to something like this, so that we understand the other stakeholders and participants in society and what they're going to do, and to help them realize that, Walmart is the fastest acting US company in disaster response.
Mm-hmm.
The second is Verizon.
Mm.
Their capability and capacity, both capability and capacity, exceed that of FEMA.
Yes.
When it comes to deploying their niche resources.
Yeah.
Logistics is the muscle of Walmart.
Yes.
Portable telecommunication towers is what Verizon does.
Yep.
So they, because it's network centric and intellectual property, they drive a flatbed up and put up a 200-foot tower in a very short period of time and reestablish cell network in a downed area.
Yep.
Walmart has the ability to move things at a pace that the US government cannot.
No, I agree.
They're excellent at what they do, and they have an excellent possibility, or they can bring a great deal to the table of emergency management as partners. But they can't become partners until they're become friends and coordinated, and we build a social relationship between them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what that's one thing that came out of the conference. So that's one big issue that came out of the conference. And I'm just going to slight different is steer is understanding that the challenge we have in this country is that we have cooperative federalism within emergency management. Right?
I think in everything, but yes, definitely.
But it essentially means that it's not one of the section 34, I think it's 34 or 35 or 31 or 32 of the Constitution that divides provincial and federal powers.
Yeah.
Emergency management disaster response does not fall into one of those. So therefore it's a cooperative model. And I, in one of my panels that I was on, gave the argument as to why we want cooperative models where people negotiate and necessarily compromise and come out with a solution.
Yep.
Because if we want to anoint a new federal agency with a set of overarching powers, the challenge is that exposes it to the political interference of a new government.
No.
Coming in and changing the entire parameters of how the system is operated every 4, 6, 8 years. But if you have an institutional model that is built upon cooperation and is signed off by 13 parties, federal, provincial, territorial, 14, including the federal government, you don't have any one government at any one level has the ability to come in and unilaterally change the way things are done. So it sets a long-term thing. And the strategic idea is what we were trying to get across at the conference. We're not making tactical decisions here.
No,
We're not
no,
interested in improving tactical outcomes
no,
at this
no,
point.
no.
Purpose of a national conversation and a national conference is to build the strategic muscle, is to build the thinking muscle about our problem set and what the problem set might look like in the future,
Yeah,
and what our resource base looks like in the country, and how can we bring those together and think big ideas, and not even at the strategic planning. We're not about deliverables. We're not about operationalization of anything at this point. And I'm really thinking that we have all these players, the
yeah,
first big outcome, and they should be at the table. And the second one is we have a lot of big problems that we probably should sit down and think big picture about, because if we're going to bring together these voices, we're not trying to solve the Don Valley flooding every 3 months.
no, no, no,
That's not what we're here to do.
no, no.
That's the city of Toronto and
Yeah,
and a government of Ontario problem.
yeah, yeah,
Like, we're not even talking to municipalities at the national conversation.
yeah.
So we're really trying to keep it at the strategic level and the longer term thinking of getting the right parties together in the decision making arena.
Yeah, as you're talking, and again, as I'm making my notes here, um, sorry, let me write this one down before I forget. I'm at that age. If I don't write something down, I'll forget it. You know, there's several layers I'm thinking of on how to get just my head around it, never mind anybody else's. Because there's so many models out there. One of the key phrases that you use are using that I like is that we have to set up a national conversation. Okay, now I'm not talking about the how at this point, but I am saying I agree like 900%, if there is such a thing, that we have to have a national conversation. And the conversation, well, we might want to say, what are the problems that we need to address as part of an emergency response? I would say, okay, maybe, let's be careful here. That might not be the right starting point. The starting point might be what's out there. Just the way you were talking. I mean, in a private sector, we have networks of companies that are coast to coast. And then even among their competitors. So let's say if a Loblaws is not down east or out west or whoever, nonetheless, they have smaller divisions. And I know that Loblaws is trying to be national, but even if we're not there, saying that we have a national network of companies that are similar to the two railroads that pulled Canada together historically. Okay. I mean, that's our history.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
We're so damn big that we needed railroads in order to connect coast to coast. Until, of course, it all fell apart. But let's not talk about that. That's a different issue. One of the things I've always noticed about Canada, having come to Canada as a first Canadian, which is always fun to say in a public domain, is that our economic and social and even up to a point cultural focal points are north-south. Our economy is north-south. It's always been a struggle for me to think that even if we are drawers of water and hewers of wood and all that other stuff, resource-based, there's a whole world out there, either in Europe or in Asia, that is a little bit livelier than our tied in relationship south.
Yeah.
All right. But that's who we are. We think that the low hanging fruit is the oil and gas, north south. You know, Calgary is the new Neo Texas or Neo Dallas of Canada, which drives me crazy because I like Houston, but I don't like Dallas. But that's my personal preference or prejudice. Here in Ontario, we're dealing with the automobile industry. Therefore, that's north-south. That's not east-west. In Quebec, it's furniture and other items, apparel up to a point, although that's been changing rapidly. And so we look at it. Even my cattle ranching friends in Alberta, you know, their first focus is to go down to Montana. Um, okay, it's reality. That's who we are. That's how we think. But to think from coast to coast to coast, got to remember, we actually have three coasts. We have the largest coastline in the world. To think from coast to coast to coast is almost a novelty for us.
Oh, yeah.
Historically, it's a novelty, never mind, you know, economically. So the uphill struggle does not mitigate the fact that we should do it, that prevents us from doing it. We should actually think very seriously about setting up a national conversation on emergency response that starts with the first question, from my point of view, not what are our problems that we should anticipate going into the future, because we live in a volatile, you know, VUCA uncertain, you know, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. But, you know, what's out there? You know, can we actually sit down at some point, even get somebody at a master's, an MA level, trying to figure out how to work out a thesis, to do some research around what kinds of networks exist that are trans-provincial. Often enough, it's industrial, it's private sector.
It's private sector and a handful, and not a large number, but a handful of the not-for-profit sector are
Exactly.
national, right?
Yes.
And so it's figuring out who is really important. And we have a very good governance framework in Canada when it comes to the federal provincial territory relationship
Yeah.
in emergency management. That's actually a pretty, and I even said it on stage that it's a pretty exemplar. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's a top level example. So my challenge was, if we have great structure, functioning structure in our governance model, and you're not getting decisions out of it, it's a function of the people who are at the table, not the system. Because the question I had at hand is, people wanted to superimpose a system. And I said, you already have the correct system. By structural design, you have the correct system.
Yeah.
The fact that you are unable to make a decision with that system does not mean you throw the system out and replace it. It means you have the wrong human beings at the table, or those human beings are under naturally opposing forces of politics, which is the reality. And it's something the emergency management field doesn't really, I'm sure enough they understand, but they don't really put it into their thought pool. Is politicians will often use different competing ideas to garner resources. So a commitment in emergency management may be withheld waiting a decision on a commitment in an industry or in agricultural or in natural resources or in fisheries, right? So the province of Newfoundland and Labrador may be not really agreeing to something in emergency management because they're waiting for a commitment on the fishing industry. And when they get that, the trade-off will be they will agree to the position in emergency management. That's a reality of life in the public sector. You can't defeat things like that. You have to understand them and incorporate it. And your reference to cross-provincial relationships is kind of why we want to build this council,
Yeah.
because corporations
Yeah.
know each other.
Yes.
And I gave one presentation on the role of social capital in emergency management and human relationships. And I talked about the fact it's not about the people in emergency management building relationships with everybody sitting there in the room.
No.
It's about building the relationships between everybody in the room.
Yeah.
And I said to them, I said, what I'm doing right here, PowerPoint, don't ever do that to your audience. There's
Mhm.
nothing faster to kill the desire to meet people than death by PowerPoint. So don't stand up in a room full of 50 people at this first council meeting and start a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. No.
This is about getting people in the,
Yeah.
because people in the room
Yeah.
are not building relationships when they're staring at you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the concept behind it is business has these relationships. These
Oh, yeah.
networks exist. It's
Oh,
not
yeah.
about you reinventing a new
No.
network. It's
No.
about you joining the existing networks
Yes. That's
and
right.
creating a new conversation
Yep.
in the existing network.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is a theoretical flip, a different lens that those in emergency management are not used to doing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, again, certain things, I've got doodles all over these 4 pieces of paper. One of the things that come to mind is different models on how to get people to come together, even competitors, which is interesting, especially in the private sector. And, one fails to realize that in the private sector, large companies, the real competition takes place at the market level, doesn't take place at the C level. They're all friends. They all belong to the same club. They all go golfing together. I mean, so long as they don't collude on pricing, which
we have a problem with.
Yeah, kind of a problem from a competition point of view, especially the Competition Act. They can do anything they want, and they do. And I know this for a fact because there's a great model on how to get people together in private sector that comes out of the Conference Board of Canada. And they create industry councils. And the reason why I know that is they, early in our history as the Logistics Institute, they knocked on our door and said, Victor, you've got a blue chip panel of directors and you've got connections to all these big companies. We'd like to create a national logistics council made up of private sector business people. Would you help us do that? And I said, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, how about we set out a framework as to what this group is going to do? And basically it was a talk session. It was a national conversation on supply chain and logistics as part of an international globalized economic world.
Yeah.
Okay. This was not, Air Canada fighting with WestJet. No. It was not that. Sobeys was there, as was Loblaws. I mean, it was a conversation. We are in logistics. This is what we do, and the globalization and the impact of IT. Globalization, impact of IT. This was this group used to meet in the late 90s, all the way up through to just before COVID. This was the emerging changes that were occurring throughout the industry because of globalization and IT, the impact of information technology, the fact that information was now everywhere within the organization, not just kept in secret places up at the top of the pyramid. And this was interesting. It was, I won't call it a think tank, but it was a conversation.
Yeah.
It was a national conversation. Now, the key to getting people to participate in a national conversation, whether it's a not-for-profit or emergency response groups at any level, provincial or otherwise, or private sector, is what's in it for me. especially private sector. So it's the what's called the WIFM. So what's in it for me? What am I going? What am I going to just sit around and talk? That ain't going to happen. All right. I work with people who focus on circular economy strategies. And while there's this whole environmental impact approach to things that people are saying, let's be good, let's recycle and so on and so forth. What circular economy people are saying, if there isn't a monetary reason for doing something, no corporation is actually going to take the lead. And I thought, so there's a whole strategy around that.
Yeah.
So a circular economy is an economic model, not a do-gooder environmental model, but the impact is on the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the frame in which you approach it. It's
exactly
in social capital research, we call it the activation context for the enabling environment. It's
right.
basically the reason why everybody's getting together in the room.
Yes.
And just saying we want to talk about the climate, maybe not really going to get everybody in. That you have to be able. And this one of the pushes that I made, and I don't know how successful I was, and time will tell, but to remind emergency management that they're in the business of marketing and their product is no different than anybody else.
Yes.
And that they have to understand that marketing is their key to success.
Yes.
And so we had that conversation. I got some weird looks from some people, expectedly so.
Yeah.
But the point that I was trying to make was simply that you have to market what you're doing. You have to sell to a company why they need to be in the room.
Right.
What is in it for, just like you said, what is in it for them?
Right.
ESG, social license to operate, those are all great
right.
phrases. They have offices that do that. They
Yep.
don't need you to be, they don't need to be in your room to do ESG or social license
Right.
to operate. So why my room? What's the purpose and the intent? And I said, that's the marketing piece you have to figure out. What's the first thing in marketing? It's your hook.
Right.
What is the hook that's going to get Canadian Tire to come into a national conversation about emergency preparedness and climate adaptation as a whole of society approach? What is going to get them into the room? That's the key question. Now, we didn't answer that question, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's about figuring out what that is that's going to matter to your target audience. And I said to them, I said, you want everybody. Well, life doesn't work like that. I said, for example, when Public Safety Canada began the Get Prepared or Be Prepared program in 2003, in preparedness messaging, they were targeting women between the ages of 37 and 43 that had kids in the home. They weren't targeting Canadians.
No.
They had a target market as part of a directly in an intentional, purposeful marketing. Now they expanded it out to seniors and other demographics, but just saying, I want Canadian industry to come to the table, here's the invitation. You have to do marketing. You have to include the principles of marketing. In any different than myself selling a course or you selling a course at the Institute. It's the same thing. It's about marketing.
Interesting you say that because again, I'm going to refer to our mutual friends at Canadian Tire, especially since I'm not a user. I repeat myself on that. I'm not a customer of theirs, but they are really good friends of ours. One of my closest friends very early on in the development of the Logistics Institute was the VP at Canadian Tire. And I remember asking Ray, I said, Ray, you're the VP of what? He said, of everything. I said, okay. So Ray and the CEO, Steve, I think his name was Stephen at the time, they were very interesting people. And when Ray retired from head office, he negotiated his own store. Okay, so, and I mean, it wasn't a franchise, it was his store. Okay, that's how powerful this man was. His first store was here in Toronto in the beaches, but his second store was at Fort McMurray.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think his third store is somewhere in BC, and I've lost contact with him, which is too bad. But at some point, I'm going to reconnect, and maybe through this, he might actually hear my voice and say, "Oh, Victor, damn you!"
Damn you mentioning this. Yeah.
But what was interesting around him was, or his store, Fort McMurray, when Fort McMurray burnt to the ground, the Canadian Tire didn't. It was the only store, one of the few establishments in
Yeah.
downtown Fort McMurray that survived. Barely a scratch. Don't ask me why. I don't want to know why, but that's a whole other issue. Now, when you think about something like that, you say, here is a store, an establishment, a building that has survived a fire all around it. What does that say about it being the center of any emergency response for the entire place? When the city hall burnt down, all the churches burnt down, all of the hockey arena burnt down, but here's the Canadian Tire. And you go, whoa, oh, okay. Oh, what is, and Canadian Tire is famous for presenting themselves as a community organization.
Oh, yes. Yep.
That is one of their big marketing, there you go, features. You go to Home Depot to build a house. You go to Canadian Tire because it's almost like going to a hockey arena, because that is, when you grew up in anywhere, Canada, there was always a Canadian Tire.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, when we start thinking outside the four walls from a private sector point of view, and we realize that all companies can only survive and succeed because of everything around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And convince them that it is their economic well-being to ensure that there's a sustainable region around them, then emergency response is part of sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah. We use resilience. In the end, was the best frame that we could do. We want to build a resilient community, and we can't do that unless everybody's at the table.
Exactly.
And when we do build a resilient community, everybody benefits, both personally and monetarily.
That's right.
Right.
That's
because
right.
your residents stay. It's great that Canadian Tire didn't burn down. But if 70% of the housing did, it's hard to run a business when your customers aren't there anymore.
That's right. That's
right. So
yeah.
it does matter to you as a business to ensure that your customer base remains available to purchase from your establishment, right?
Exactly. You know, it's that reverse of what I've said often enough in other contexts, that, you know, that mom and pop operation down the street from where your organization and all your employees work is dependent on all of your employees in order to be financially viable.
Right.
Well, guess what? You also, depend on them to be available.
And I'll give you a prime example of that. I spoke to a couple of people who had just got back from the Jasper recovery operations in the town of Jasper.
Yeah.
So 30% of the buildings were lost, 70% were saved. The Jasper Lodge is scheduled to open on 1 October. The Jasper Lodge is like a lot of the big resort facilities. Nobody can afford to live in Jasper. Nobody can afford to live in Banff because there are no places available when they are, your rich uncle may be able to afford a room in a house there. Like it's exorbitantly expensive.
Yeah.
There were 5 buildings lost at the Jasper Lodge. One was the golf course maintenance building. Probably time of year. It's not a bad time of year to lose it because you got time to rebuild it.
And from my point of view, who cares? But keep
Well, yeah, I'm a golfer, so I care, but really probably can make it. The other four were all of their staff accommodation buildings.
Ooh.
The Jasper Lodge itself was spared. Their buildings, their facilities were spared. They have no place for their employees to live. And there
Oh,
is no surplus housing in Jasper.
no, there isn't.
So there is a corporation that is faced with a very real outcome of a very real disaster that there is no easy solution to, short of a whole ton of ACO trailers being brought in the winter
Mm,
in Alberta
mm.
for your employees. So this is a very real example of when 30% of the residential housing burns and your customer base goes down by 30%, because those people can't live in Jasper
No,
while their houses are being
no,
rebuilt because
no,
there's no place for them to stay.
that's right.
So it's important companies in Jasper could have had the opportunity to contribute to making Jasper a resilient community by contributing to increasing the preparedness level and the mitigation so that they would not be in this position, or the likelihood they'd be in this position is less, that they lose their staff accommodations or that they lose a 30% of their customer client base. Or your major client base is not necessarily the people in Jasper, but the places for them to stay. And a number of notable hotels did burn. So the number of rooms available is dramatically less.
Mm-hmm.
If that's true, then the number of customers who are going to come this winter to spend it in Jasper are going to be less because they don't have a place to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all very real economic impacts on a business. And when we phrase the marketing in that way,
Yeah, yeah,
and use Jasper as an example,
yeah, yeah.
two companies, two Canadian Tires that are the only place in a small town like Deep River, Ontario. The only big store in the entire town is Canadian Tire,
That's right.
right? And it's 45 minutes from the next city that has a Walmart.
Yeah.
45 minutes to an hour away from the closest Walmart, and Canadian Tire is the only major actor in town. And it can have a big role to play because the government resources are exceptionally limited.
Yeah.
There's no government funding in it. But I will, and this did come up, we have to be careful not to make it look like we're looking for capital resources from the
No,
business sector,
no, no,
because they will run to the door faster than you can understand.
no,
If our marketing and it looks like, hey, we need 50 million to make the city of Banff
no,
resilient, we're
no,
not getting it out of the government, so we're going to come to you and look for it.
no, no, can't be
Right?
done that way.
That won't work.
No.
And so that was one of the things that did come out of the conversation is business needs to be involved because we want business to be involved, not because we want to access their capital
No,
in their bank accounts.
no, 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 no. Business needs to be involved because their viability and sustainability as a business
Yeah.
needs to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
It's not a case of the way you just described it. If everything burns down around you and you're the only business left, who the hell is going to buy from you?
Yeah.
All right. If you do not take some kind of responsibility, I was just going to call responsibility, not throwing cash at it. If you don't take some kind of responsibility to ensure that you remain viable in your own community, then guess what? When the shizzy hits the fizzy, you are up that creek. I'll just leave it at that. And forget your paddles because no one's going to buy them anyway.
Well, nobody will have a boat to paddle.
Nobody will have a boat. Nobody will have. You may not even have people to work for you.
Yeah,
Hence,
it's kind of hard to run a Canadian Tire with two managers.
That's right. The Jasper Lodge thing.
Yeah.
Right. Who's going to live where in order to work at Jasper Lodge?
Yeah. And so likely their only option is they're going to have to take a third of their available rooms and convert them to staff accommodations,
That's a
and
possibility.
which gets them through a year or two
Yeah,
while they're rebuilding their staff accommodations.
yeah, yeah,
But unfortunately, that puts a whole different long-term picture on the
yeah,
economic sustainability of a
yeah.
business,
That's
right?
right.
Because if you're a seasonal business and you need to make, you know, just like some retail stores make 70% of their annual income in November and December.
Hmm. Yes. Oh,
And then
oh,
you take November and December off the map,
yeah.
they're not sustainable over the year.
Well, you know, and I know because you're going out to Banff during the what we both call the dead season, which
Yep.
is not dead by any stretch of the
No,
imagination.
but dead. I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
But it's the post summer tourism and the pre ski season. Although every time we delivered a program out in Banff at the Banff Center, which I still like, and I
Yep.
would love to go back to, that's a whole other reason why we can't. But it was always in November, and every time we were there, the women's world's downhill ski uh, 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 whatever you want to call it, contest. We'll call it a contest. I know it's the wrong word. Um, always occurred during that fallow period because there was nobody else to interfere, and there was always
Yep.
snow on the mountains.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, the men's followed because they were dominant, but the women's was always before, and they were always there when we were there.
Oh, and I'll be blunt. It's the only reason the conference can be afforded to be held at the premier
Spring.
location at the Banff Springs Hotel in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
mountains
yeah, yeah, yeah,
at a Fairmont property
yeah. Oh yeah,
because it's happening in between.
yeah.
Um, and the rest of us haven't been able to afford to stay at the Fairmont.
Yes, yeah.
And there are a number of people, believe it or not, that are going to that conference that commute from Calgary.
Yeah, it's well, I was just going to say it's only two 2.5 hours, and once you get out of Calgary, it's a pretty straight
That's pretty
drive.
straight driving. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's like 90 minutes or less
Well, it depends. It
on the
depends.
traffic. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on the traffic. It
But
depends on
again,
the
in the
traffic.
dead zone, you're
Yeah,
not
that's right.
in the dead time frame. I'm not lined up with all the skiers or the golfers or
No,
the
no, no,
or
no,
the
no, no,
campers.
no, no. I agree. I agree. And so, no, no, I'm not saying go find yourself a cheap motel in downtown Calgary
No,
and
no,
commute every day. No,
no.
no. Besides, I'm sure your wife would kill you anyway. But moving right along, um, if there were, as we begin to wrap up, if there were one or two key takeaways from your week-long conference, what would it be?
The
What
first
would
one,
they be?
the first one would be we really are in it together
Yeah,
in the sense that disaster risk, climate risk, transcends geographical boundaries and socioeconomic conditions.
that's right.
We're all facing a future, and it's not glum, it's not bleak,
No, no, no.
but there are hazards.
Yep.
And if one sector of society is affected by the hazard, it will impact the other sectors directly or indirectly.
Yep.
And so, from a sense, we all benefit by being part of the conversation.
Yep.
I think is a better way to phrase the takeaway. The second part is that really surprised me is the number of optimistic people.
Oh,
And that is just a flavor because I met probably 3 dozen people that I've connected with on LinkedIn over the last 2 years that I've never physically, as we say, met in 3D. Um, and it was really, really an enjoyable experience to realize how many people are optimistic about what we can do in this space. Realistic, understanding the limitations. We're not getting $500 million of annual new
no, no,
funding
no, no,
from any government. That but it's the optimism of people are coming to the table in their roles saying, I want to be part of a solution. I think there is a solution, and I'm willing to help and do what we can.
Oh, wow.
And that's really the biggest takeaway to come away from that, is that we really have an opportunity here
Yeah.
to have the national conversation. We have a lot of people who believe that there was that this needed to happen, and are
Yeah.
very grateful that it did happen. Next year's is already planned.
Oh,
It's already
wonderful.
booked.
Uh, yeah, actually, the connectivity, we're understanding that we're all connected, we're all in this together. That is a critical issue in the conversation. This is not about this particular group or that particular group, the not-for-profit sector, the for-profit sector. Let's drop all of the ways in which we compartmentalize our thinking. Let's think strategically, let's think holistically, let's talk about the total package, recognizing that it's not even a package, that the total issue is not necessarily containable because it's got its complexities. We can't contain complexity, we have to understand it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the issue. But you just almost knocked me off my chair. The optimism.
Yeah.
This optimism, enthusiasm, these are the three words that optimism, enthusiasm, and energy. These are the three words that I just wrote down as you were talking.
Yep.
That needs to be captured. And I'm going to be somewhat as an outsider, well, I am an outsider, but as an outsider, blunt about this. While a conference next year is on the agenda right now, or at least on the planning table, my strong suggestion is that capturing that energy in very real words, in very real ways, I should say, will enrich that next collective meeting in terms of this is what we thought we can actually accomplish, beginning to frame action. And that means maybe a whole bunch of subgroups need to connect, not formally, not as an established group with a charter or any of that stuff, to start to continue the conversation, to ensure that the enthusiasm maintains a high level. That is absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Maintain the initiative, maintain the aim, and keep the conversation going.
Keep the conversation going. I think that's wonderful. I'm very, very impressed. I'm impressed at the front end at how this damn thing occurred in 7 months.
Yeah.
That blows my mind. And then I'm impressed by the number of people who participated, and now I'm impressed by what I would consider the primary outcome, which is optimism, enthusiasm, and energy. Wow.
Yeah. Amazing time.
Yeah. One last thing to keep in mind, and this is something that you and I can talk about at some other time and in a different way. While meeting in, what is it, 3D?
Yeah, meeting in 3D.
Meeting in 3D is necessary. No two ways about it. Meeting in a tech mediated way crosses borders and deals effectively with time, so that you don't have to worry about traveling or whatever. But some of the things I'm beginning to become aware of, especially when young people come out of university, and they're telling me about the use of IT for or the use of AI for predictive analytics and how it's going to have an impact on everything we do. And I'm not talking about self-correct nonsense in emails
No,
that
no.
screw me up. That's nonsense. That's not AI. That's just nonsense. I'm talking about real AI. The whole capability of technology to have a central point of not just communication, but a central resource.
Yep.
Using the technology, not a building,
Yep.
not a place, but using technology to keep the national conversation going, but also to have the national conversation emerge as real connections among all the players.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Bricks and mortar, always wonderful, but at the same time, to avoid any, because if we want to overcome the disparity of regionalism, which is, Canadian federalism at all levels, economic as well as political, and all the other words you can put around it. If there is a national side to this, and I think it is, and if it's a national conversation with a national impact in terms of identifying the networks as needed to respond as needed, then there has to be a central, not governing group, but a central processing group. I'll just
Yep.
leave it at that.
Yep.
To me, that's the great, as the guy who doesn't even know how to use his phone properly, I am now positioning IT and AI in particular as a way to support this, not as a solution.
No, AI will always be the transactional nature. The humans will be the strategic thinkers.
That's
But
right.
we can do strategic thinking if we don't have to waste time on transactional activities.
Exactly. 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 On one last note, and we know this, you're ex-military, that there is such a thing as central command somewhere, and you don't even have to go up to NORAD to know that there, even before all of the sophisticated IT that we're dealing with now, they used technology in order to communicate, in order to detect, in order to monitor, in order to. One of the things I remember seeing, I was invited many times to sit at the head office of the CEO's Council, actually, at Canada Post, and it always fascinated me. I'm not going to talk about in any critical way about Canada Post or the people in the room, but what always fascinated me was you sat in a room where everybody yelled at each other, and you were having conversations with people in the regions live at the time. This was not after or before. This is live. But that wasn't the part that impressed me. What impressed me was the room next door. The room next door was this massive Canadian coast-to-coast map that showed every delivery route of every bag of mail in the entire country.
Yeah.
And I thought, holy, now there's a system. And it was all live. It was all real time. This was not yesterday's map.
Takes mapping your supply chain to a new level.
Totally. Absolutely. And there are corporations that would probably turn green with envy, knowing that is some kind of capability.
Yep. I've seen the same thing once in the CN Operations Center.
Yes. Same thing.
In Toronto. Yep.
Yeah. When you have a coast to coast presence, okay, you need to know what's going on at every dot and tickle of the operations. Period.